I sat there in the courtroom, the air thick with tension, my hands resting on the wooden table in front of me, feeling every scratch and groove under my fingertips. Across from me was Camilla, my soon-to-be ex-wife, her perfectly styled hair and sharp gray suit making her look like she'd already won. Next to her, Griffin Leary, her lawyer, leaned back in his chair with that smug grin plastered across his face, like he was enjoying every second of my downfall. The divorce hearing had dragged on for hours, and now we were at the end, the part where they divide up our lives like it was some garage sale. Griffin's voice cut through the room, sharp and mocking. "Enjoy your new life. You'll be leaving with nothing," he said, his eyes glinting with victory. Camilla didn't even look at me when she spoke, her words cold and quick. "You should have been a better husband." I felt my heart slam against my chest, a hot rush of anger mixing with something heavier. Regret. Maybe, or just plain hurt. But I didn't let it show. I kept my face steady, my jaw tight, my eyes locked on the judge's weathered hands as he shuffled papers in front of him. The judge, a tired-looking man with gray hair and a voice like gravel, turned to me. "Mr. Rhodes, do you have any final words before I make my ruling?" he asked, peering over his glasses. The room went quiet, and I could feel Camilla and Griffin watching me, waiting for me to crumble, to beg, to say something weak. But I didn't. Instead, I felt a small, strange calm settle over me, like the moment before a storm hits. I reached into my briefcase, my fingers brushing against the thick folder I'd spent months putting together. "Actually, yes," I said, my voice steady as I slid it across the table toward him. "I'd like to submit this as evidence." The judge raised an eyebrow, curious, and took it from me. Camilla's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing, but I didn't look at her. Not yet. I wanted to see her face when the truth hit. The judge opened the folder, his fingers flipping through the pages one by one. I knew what he was seeing. Every receipt, every email, every bank statement I dug up like buried treasure. My hands stayed clasped in front of me, but inside, my mind was racing. This wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was about everything she'd taken from me, everything she thought I'd let her get away with. The silence stretched on, and I risked a glance at Camilla. Her smirk was gone. Her face had gone pale, like the blood had drained right out of her. Griffin shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping nervously on the table, his confidence cracking. "What is this?" he muttered under his breath, but I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The judge's eyes flicked up to me, then back to the papers, and I could tell he was starting to understand. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment sink in. For months, I'd been the quiet one, the guy who didn't fight back, the husband who let her walk all over him. But not today. Today, I was the one with the upper hand, and it felt good, better than I'd expected. Camilla's voice broke the silence, sharp and shaky. "What did you do?" she hissed, leaning toward me, her eyes wide with something I hadn't seen in her before, fear. I didn't answer right away. I just smiled, a small, tight smile, and turned my attention back to the judge. He cleared his throat, setting the folder down, and looked at Camilla's side of the room. "Counselor, Ms. Rhodes," he said, his tone heavy, "we're going to need to discuss this further." My heart was still pounding, but now it wasn't anger driving it. It was satisfaction. I'd played my card, and the game was about to change. The courtroom buzzed with whispers as the judge called for a recess, and I watched Camilla and Griffin huddle together, their heads bent low, their voices sharp and fast. She shot me a look, half rage, half panic, and I met her gaze without flinching. 12 years of marriage, and it had come to this. Me with a folder full of her secrets, her with nothing but a lawyer who was starting to sweat. I didn't know what the judge would decide, not yet, but I knew one thing for sure. Camilla wasn't laughing anymore. And that was enough for now. I stood up as the bailiff motioned for us to leave the room, my folders still sitting on the judge's bench like a ticking bomb. This wasn't the end, not even close, but it was a start. A damn good one. I walked out of the courtroom, my step steady, my head high, feeling lighter than I had in years. Whatever came next, I was ready. I woke up that morning expecting the usual, coffee brewing in the kitchen, the soft hum of the house waking up, maybe a quiet hour to myself before the day started. The bedroom was still dark, the curtains drawn tight, and the clock on my nightstand blinked 6:45 in red digits. I rubbed my eyes, feeling the weight of another restless night, and swung my legs out of bed. Camilla was already up, which wasn't unusual. She'd always been the early riser, the one with energy I could never match. I shuffled into the kitchen, my bare feet cold against the tile, and saw her standing by the counter. She wasn't making coffee, though. She was holding a manila envelope, her fingers tapping against it absently, her eyes glued to her phone. "Morning," I mumbled, reaching for the coffee pot, but she didn't look up. Instead, she slid the envelope across the counter toward me, her voice casual, like she was telling me about the weather. "I've spoken to my lawyer," she said. "This should be simple." I froze, my hand hovering over the pot, the words sinking in slow and heavy. 12 years we'd been married, 12 years of me standing by her, building a life together, and this was how it ended? I picked up the envelope, my fingers fumbling with the clasp, and pulled out the papers inside. Divorce papers. Her signature was already there, neat and sharp, like she'd signed a business contract. My eyes scanned the pages, the legal words blurring together, but one thing stood out clear as day. I was getting nothing. No house, no money, no piece of the business I'd helped her build. Zero. I looked up at her, waiting for something, an explanation, an apology, anything. But she just kept scrolling on her phone, her face blank. "Camilla," I said, my voice rough, "what is this?" She finally glanced at me, her eyes cool and distant. "It's over," she said. "You knew this was coming." Did I? I stood there, the papers shaking in my hands, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at her, trying to make sense of it. She didn't even flinch, just went back to her phone like I wasn't there. I'd spent years supporting her, pouring myself into Rhodes Interiors, her design company. I wasn't the flashy one, sure. I didn't stand in front of clients or schmooze at parties, but I was the backbone. I'd handled the boring stuff, the admin work, the accounting, the endless emails and schedules. I'd stayed up late balancing her books when she was too tired, planned her events when she was too busy, all without a paycheck or a thank you. And now? Now she was tossing me out like I'd been some hired help she didn't need anymore. "After everything," I said, my voice low, "this is what I get." She sighed, setting her phone down, and looked at me like I was a kid who didn't get it. "You didn't keep up," she said. I grew. "You didn't." The words hit me like a punch, and I felt something inside me snap. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet break, like a string pulled too tight. I walked out of the kitchen, the papers still in my hand, and sat on the couch in the living room. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I could hear her moving around behind me, getting ready for her day like nothing had happened. I flipped through the pages again, reading every line, every cold, calculated detail. She wanted the house we'd bought together, the one I'd fixed up with my own hands, new paint, new floors, every leaky faucet replaced. She wanted the business, all of it, even though I'd been there from day one, back when it was just an idea scribbled on a napkin. No alimony, no equity, no nothing. Just a clean break for her, and a big, empty nothing for me. My chest tightened, and I clenched my jaw, trying to keep the anger from spilling out. I wanted to yell, to throw the papers in her face, to demand she explain how she could do this, but I didn't. I just sat there, breathing hard, letting it sink in. By the time she left for work, her heels clicking against the floor as she grabbed her bag and walked out, I was still on the couch. The door slammed shut, and the silence swallowed me whole. I looked around the room, the framed photos of us, the furniture we'd picked out together, the life we'd built, and it hit me. She'd planned this. She'd been steps ahead, plotting this casual goodbye while I was still playing the loyal husband. I dropped the papers on the coffee table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. I could have begged her to stay, could have fought right then and there, but what was the point? She'd made up her mind, and I wasn't in it anymore. But as the minutes ticked by, something else started growing inside me, not just hurt, not just anger, but a spark of something harder, something sharper. I wasn't going to let her walk away with everything. Not like this. I didn't know how yet, but I'd find a way to fight back. That morning, when she handed me those papers, she thought she'd ended it. She didn't know she'd just started something bigger. I wasn't always the guy sitting quietly in the background, letting life happen around me. I used to be more than that. And that morning after Camilla dropped the divorce papers on me, I couldn't stop thinking about how it all started. I sat in the living room, the same spot where I'd stared at those papers, but now my mind was drifting back to the early days, back when Camilla and I were a team. The house was still quiet, the kind of quiet that presses down on you, and I could almost hear the echoes of how things used to be. I'd been her biggest cheerleader when she started Rhodes Interiors, back when it was just the two of us in a cramped apartment, her sketching designs on cheap graph paper while I built her first portfolio website from scratch. I wasn't a tech genius, but I figured it out. Hours of trial and error, late nights with bad coffee, just so she could show her work to the world. She'd smiled at me then, her eyes bright, saying, "We're going to make it big, you and me." I believed her. I believed in us. Those first years, I was everywhere she needed me to be. I'd cold call potential clients, my voice shaky but determined, setting up meetings for her to pitch her ideas. I'd shake hands at networking events, my tie crooked and my palms sweaty, while she worked the room like she was born for it. People started noticing her, her talent, her charm, and soon the clients rolled in. I was proud, even if I stayed in the shadows. I didn't mind being the quiet one. I liked building something with her. When she threw her first big business mixer, I was the guy behind the bar, pouring drinks, smiling at her guests, making sure everyone had a good time. No one remembered my name, but I didn't care. Camilla was shining, and that was enough. I built half of that business with her, even if my name wasn't on the logo. The website, the client lists, the late-night brainstorming sessions, it was ours, or so I thought. Now, sitting there with the divorce papers staring back at me, I realized how much I'd given and how little she'd ever given back. The house felt emptier than ever, every corner reminding me of what I'd put into it. I'd fixed the creaky stairs, painted the walls that soft blue she loved, spent weekends planting the garden she'd always wanted. And Rhodes Interiors? I'd been the one tracking expenses when she forgot, chasing down payments from slow clients, keeping the books balanced so she could focus on designing. I never asked for credit, never demanded a title. I just did it because I loved her, because I believed in her dream. But she'd taken it all and made it hers, like I'd never existed. The anger was still there, simmering under my skin, but it wasn't just anger anymore, it was clarity. I knew that business inside and out, better than she thought I did. That was my edge, and I was going to use it. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts, my thumb hovering over a name I hadn't called in years, Zaire. He'd been a friend back in college, a guy who'd always had my back, and now he was a paralegal at some small firm downtown. I hit call, my heart picking up as it rang. "Hey, man," he answered, his voice warm but surprised. "Been a while." I didn't waste time with small talk. "I need your help," I said, keeping it simple. "Camilla's trying to take everything, divorce stuff. I've got some ideas, but I need someone who knows the legal side." He didn't hesitate. "Say no more. Meet me tomorrow, coffee shop on 5th. We'll figure it out." I thanked him, feeling a small weight lift, and then dialed another number. Noah, a freelance tech guy I'd met at one of Camilla's events. He was quiet like me, but sharp, the kind of guy who could dig into anything digital. "Noah," I said when he picked up, "I need you to track some stuff, old files, accounts, passwords. Can you do it?" He laughed, a short, dry sound. "If it's online, I can find it. Send me what you've got." That afternoon, I started pulling things together. I rummaged through the home office, her office, technically, where I'd spent countless hours working for free. Old laptops, stacks of papers, USB drives she'd forgotten about. She'd always been careless with the details, leaving me to clean up the mess, and now that was going to bite her. I found backups of early business files, client lists I'd typed up, even some login info scribbled on sticky notes she'd tossed aside. My hand shook a little as I plugged in a dusty drive and watched the screen light up with folders, years of data she thought I'd never touch. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for yet, but I knew there was something. She'd gotten sloppy over the years, too confident, and I'd been too loyal to notice. Not anymore. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, I had a plan taking shape. Zaire would help me figure out what was legal, what I could use. Noah would dig deeper, crack into accounts she'd locked me out of. And me? I'd piece it all together, every quiet contribution I'd made, every hour I'd spent building her empire. The house creaked around me, and I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. Camilla thought she'd left me with nothing, but she didn't know what I was capable of, not yet. I wasn't the silent husband anymore. I was the guy who'd built half her world, and I was about to remind her of that, one file at a time. The nights started blending together after that morning with the divorce papers, each one stretching out long and restless as I sat alone in the house, digging through the past. The living room had become my war room. Papers scattered across the coffee table, my laptop glowing in the dark, a half-empty mug of cold coffee, sitting forgotten by my side. I'd always been the organized one, the guy who kept track of the details Camilla ignored, and now that was my weapon. I started small, pulling up old files from the USB drives I'd found, flipping through stacks of receipts she'd shoved into drawers years ago. At first, it was just a mess, random numbers, scribbled notes, invoices that didn't add up, but the more I looked, the more I saw patterns she'd never bothered to hide. My eyes burned from the screen's glare, but I couldn't stop. Every click, every page, was another piece of the puzzle, and I was starting to see the whole ugly picture. Camilla had grown reckless over the years, too sure of herself, too convinced I'd never look twice at what she was doing. I found unfiled receipts, hundreds of them, tucked away in folders she hadn't touched since the early days of Rhodes Interiors. Little things at first, like payments to vendors that didn't exist, expenses listed twice on different dates. Then it got bigger, backdated invoices for projects that never happened, money shuffled to shell companies with names I didn't recognize. I leaned back on the couch, rubbing my face, trying to process it. She'd been moving cash around, hiding it, and I'd been too busy keeping her books straight to notice. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitant, then I typed one of the company names into a search. Nothing came up, no website, no address, just a dead end. That's when I knew I was onto something real. I kept going, night after night, the house silent except for the soft hum of the laptop and the occasional creak of the floorboards. Noah had come through with some old passwords, stuff Camilla hadn't changed in years, and that opened the floodgates. Bank statements, emails, account logs I hadn't seen since I stopped handling the day-to-day admin. I found offshore transfers, small at first, then bigger, thousands of dollars slipping out of Rhodes Interiors into accounts I couldn't trace. My heart pounded as I copied everything onto a new drive, my hands steady even though my mind was racing. This wasn't just about her cheating me out of the divorce. This was fraud, maybe worse. I thought about all those early investors, the ones who'd believed in her, the ones she'd pushed out once the business took off. I'd met them, shaken their hands, promised them she'd do right by them. Had she screwed them over too? Then I found something that stopped me cold, payments to Elliot Reyes. I knew that name. He was her consultant, the guy she'd started mentioning a couple years back, always with a little smile I didn't like. I'd seen him at a gala once, tall, slick, too friendly with her, his hand lingering on her arm while I stood across the room pouring drinks. The payments started small, a few hundred here and there, labeled consulting fees, but they grew 5,000, 10,000, all funneled through Rhodes Interiors like it was legit. I stared at the screen, my jaw tight, feeling the sting of it hit me all over again. Not just her boyfriend, but her paid boyfriend, funded with money I'd helped her make. I wanted to smash something, to yell, to storm out and confront her right then, but I didn't. I took a deep breath, saved the file, and kept going. Anger wasn't enough anymore. I needed strategy. The folder I was building grew thicker every night, digital at first, then printed pages I stacked in a locked drawer. I cross-checked dates, matched payments to projects, dug into every corner of the business I could reach. I found more. Fake charitable write-offs, donations to groups that didn't exist, all logged as tax deductions. She'd siphoned hundreds of thousands over the years, pocketing it while I was balancing her spreadsheets, thinking I was helping us build a future. My hand shook as I printed the last batch, the printer whirring in the quiet house. I wasn't just fighting for my half of the divorce anymore. I was holding proof she'd broken laws, hurt people, lied to everyone. Justice wasn't a vague hope now. It was a real thing, sitting in that stack of paper. I met Zaire at the coffee shop the next day, sliding a few key pages across the table. He whistled low, flipping through them, his eyes sharp. "This is heavy," he said, glancing up at me. "You sure you want to go this far?" I nodded, my voice firm. "She doesn't get to walk away clean." He didn't argue, just told me to keep it quiet, keep it safe, and he'd help me figure out what was admissible. Noah called later, his voice tense. "I've got more account logs from 3 years back. You're not gonna like it." He emailed me the files, and I spent another night connecting dots, my coffee going cold again. Every new piece made the picture clearer. Camilla hadn't just betrayed me, she'd built her success on a house of cards. And I was about to pull it down. The courtroom felt different that day, heavier somehow, like the air itself knew something big was about to happen. I sat at my table, my hands resting on the smooth wood, my folder sitting in front of me like a loaded gun I'd finally get to fire. Across the room, Camilla perched in her chair, her posture stiff, her eyes flicking between me and the judge. Griffin Leary sat beside her, his usual smirk dialed back to something tighter, less sure. The divorce hearing had been dragging on for weeks, but this was it, the final moment, the one I'd been building towards since that morning she handed me those papers. My attorney, Delilah Chin, gave me a small nod from her seat next to me, her calm confidence steadying my nerves. I'd handed her the folder days ago, and she'd told me, "This changes everything, just wait for the right time." That time was now. The judge shuffled his papers, his glasses perched low on his nose, and looked up at us. "We're here to finalize the division of assets," he said, his voice dry and procedural. "Any last submissions before I rule?" Griffin stood, smoothing his tie, ready to launch into some polished speech about why Camilla deserved it all, the house, the business, every dime. But before he could get a word out, I raised my hand. "Your Honor," I said, my voice steady even though my heart was hammering, "I have something to submit." The judge nodded, curious, and I slid the folder across the table to the bailiff, who carried it up to the bench. Camilla's head snapped toward me, her eyes narrowing, but I kept my gaze on the judge. This was my moment, and I wasn't going to let her stare me down. He opened the folder, his fingers moving slowly at first, then pausing as he read. The room went quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own breathing, and I watched his expression shift, his brows furrowed, his mouth tightened. I knew what he was seeing, the tax evasion records, the investor fraud, the fake charitable write-offs I'd spent nights uncovering. Pages of bank statements showing offshore transfers, invoices for shell companies, payments to Elliot Reyes labeled as consulting when they were anything but. I'd laid it all out, dates, amounts, proof she'd siphoned hundreds of thousands from Rhodes Interiors into her own pockets. My hands stayed clasped in front of me, but inside, I was buzzing, every nerve alive with the weight of what I'd done. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about showing who she really was. Griffin shifted in his seat, his fingers tapping the table, his face tightening as the judge kept reading. Camilla leaned toward him, whispering something sharp and fast, but he shook his head, his eyes locked on that folder like it was a bomb about to go off. And it was. I'd made sure every piece was airtight. Zaire had checked the legal angles, Noah had pulled the digital trails, and I'd connected it all. The judge flipped another page, then another, his silence stretching out until it felt like the whole room was holding its breath. Finally, he set the folder down, his hands resting on it, and looked up at Camilla's side of the room. "Ms. Rhodes," he said, his voice low and serious, "these are serious allegations." My chest tightened, but I didn't move, didn't flinch. Let the evidence talk. I didn't need to say a word. Griffin shot to his feet, his voice louder than it needed to be. "Your Honor, this is irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. This is a stunt, a desperate attempt to—" The judge cut him off with a raised hand, his eyes sharp. "Sit down, counselor. I'll decide what's relevant." Griffin sank back into his chair, his face red, and I caught the smallest tremble in Camilla's hands as she clasped them in her lap. She wasn't smirking now. She wasn't even looking at me, just staring straight ahead, her jaw tight, her skin pale. I leaned back in my chair, letting the moment settle over me like a wave. For months, I'd been the one on the ropes, the guy she thought she could toss aside with nothing. But now? Now she was the one squirming, and I was the one holding the cards. The judge cleared his throat, flipping back to the first page of the folder, and started asking questions, slow, deliberate ones, directed at Camilla's team. "Can you explain these transfers to an account in the Cayman Islands, dated 3 years ago?" he asked. Griffin stumbled over his words, something about business expenses, but the judge wasn't buying it. "And these payments to Mr. Reyes, what consulting services did he provide, exactly?" Camilla's voice broke in, sharp and shaky. "That's private. This doesn't belong here." But the judge didn't let up, his tone growing harder with every question. I sat there, silent, watching it unfold, feeling the shift in the room. Delilah leaned toward me, her voice a whisper. "You did it." They're rattled. I nodded, barely, keeping my eyes on the judge. This wasn't about gloating. It was about justice, and it was finally happening. By the time he called a recess, the air was thick with tension, and Camilla's team was scrambling. Griffin gathered his papers, his movements jerky, while Camilla shot me a look, pure venom, her eyes blazing with something I hadn't seen in her before. Fear, maybe, or fury, or both. I met her gaze, calm and steady, and didn't look away until she turned back to Griffin, her whisper sharp and urgent. The bailiff ushered us out, and I stood, my legs steady even though my pulse was still racing. Delilah clapped me on the shoulder as we walked into the hallway. "That folder's a game changer," she said. They didn't see it coming. I nodded, feeling the weight of it all. The nights of digging, the years of being invisible, finally paying off. Camilla thought she'd won before the fight even started. She was wrong. That night after the courtroom showdown, I was back in the house, pacing the living room, the folder still burning a hole in my mind. The TV flickered in the background, some late-night news I wasn't really watching, but the quiet felt too heavy to sit in alone. My phone sat on the coffee table, dark and silent, until it buzzed hard against the wood, jolting me out of my thoughts. Unknown number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen, then picked it up. "Hello," I said, my voice rough from hours of not talking. There was a pause, then a deep voice came through, low and raspy, like it was trying to hide itself. "Back off," it said. No hello, no explanation, just those two words, sharp and cold. My stomach twisted, but I kept my tone steady. "Who is this?" Another pause, longer this time, then a click. The line went dead. I stared at the phone, my heart thudding, wondering if I'd imagined it. But I hadn't. Someone was scared enough to call me in the middle of the night. The next morning, Delilah's name lit up my screen before I'd even poured my coffee. "Camilla's team filed a motion," she said, her voice brisk but calm. "They want to settle, full offer, house included, some cash too." I leaned against the kitchen counter, the mug warm in my hands, and let that sink in. A settlement. After everything, the folder, the evidence, the judge's questions, they were waving a white flag. But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a bribe, a desperate grab to shut me up before I pushed harder. "They're scared," Delilah added. That folder hit a nerve. I nodded. Even though she couldn't see me, my mind already spinning. "What do you think?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "We've got them on the ropes. If you want more, we keep going." I set the mug down, staring out the window at the empty street. More. I wasn't done, not yet. Then things started getting weird. Delilah called again that afternoon, her tone tighter this time. "My office got broken into last night," she said. "Files tossed, nothing big taken, just a mess. Cops think it's random." But she didn't finish, and she didn't need to. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. Random didn't fit. Not after that call, not after the settlement push. Later that day, I tried logging into my bank account. Froze solid, no explanation, just a "contact us" message blinking on the screen. I spent an hour on hold with the bank, my jaw tight, until they unfroze it, muttering something about a security flag. Coincidence? Maybe. But then Zaire texted me, his words short and clipped. "Guy in a black car followed me home. Be careful." My hands went cold as I read it, the pieces clicking together too fast. Camilla wasn't just rattled. She was panicking, and someone was acting on it. I sat on the couch that night, the house dark except for the glow of my laptop, trying to make sense of it all. The folder had cracked something open, something bigger than I'd expected, and now the pushback was real: phone calls, break-ins, frozen accounts. I wasn't scared, not exactly, but I was alert, every creak of the house making me glance toward the windows. Then my email pinged, a new message from an address I didn't know, no name, just numbers and letters mashed together. The subject line stopped me cold. "Check the attachments before it's too late." My pulse kicked up, and I clicked it, half expecting a virus or a scam. Instead, it was photos, grainy, but clear enough. Camilla and Griffin at a cafe, heads bent close, and a woman I didn't recognize sitting across from them. Sharp suit, dark hair, a notepad in her hand. The timestamp on the images, 2 days ago. I zoomed in, my eyes narrowing, trying to place her. Something about her felt off, too stiff, too focused. I forwarded the email to Noah with a quick note. "Who's the woman?" He got back to me in 20 minutes, his reply short, "Working on it. Give me a day." I leaned back, staring at the screen, the photos still open. Whoever sent this wanted me to see it, wanted me to know Camilla was scrambling. But why? Was it a warning, a threat, or something else? I couldn't sleep after that, kept the lights on, kept checking the locks, my mind running circles around what I'd stirred up. The settlement offer sat in my inbox too, forwarded by Delilah, but I didn't touch it. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about the truth, and I was too close to back off now. The next day, Noah called, his voice low and quick. "That woman?" "Special Agent Thea Morgan, FBI Financial Crimes." I dug into some public records. Rhodes Interiors is on their radar. Money laundering, maybe more. My breath caught, the phone heavy in my hand. FBI. Suddenly, the break-in, the call, the tale on Zaire, it all made sense. Camilla wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting something way bigger, and I'd accidentally stepped right into it. What do I do? I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. Noah didn't sugarcoat it. Keep your head down, but don't stop. They're watching her, not you, yet. I hung up, my hands shaky, and looked at the photos again. Camilla's face in the cafe, tense and sharp, told me everything. She was cornered, and I was the one holding the match. The house felt like a cage that week, every shadow sharper, every noise louder. After that anonymous email dropped those photos in my lap, I kept them open on my laptop, staring at Camilla and Griffin huddled with Special Agent Thea Morgan, the FBI's financial crimes expert, in some tucked-away cafe. My coffee sat cold on the table, untouched, as I tried to wrap my head around it. Rhodes Interiors wasn't just a messy divorce battle anymore. It was a federal investigation, and I'd stumbled right into the middle of it. My phone buzzed every few hours. Texts from Zaire checking in, updates from Noah digging deeper, Delilah keeping me posted, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched too. The late-night call, the break-in at Delilah's office, my bank account freezing, it wasn't random. Camilla was desperate, and desperation made people dangerous. But I wasn't backing down. Not now. Not when I was this close to seeing it all unravel. I met Delilah at her office a few days later, stepping over the mess the break-in had left. Papers still scattered, a cracked picture frame leaning against the wall. She handed me a sealed file, her eyes steady but serious. This came from a source I trust, she said, tapping it with her finger. Open it when you're alone. I nodded, tucking it under my arm, my stomach tightening. Back home, I locked the door, pulled the curtains, and sat at the kitchen table, the file staring back at me. My hands hesitated, then ripped it open. Inside was an affidavit, signed by Kaylee Duran, Griffin's junior associate. I'd met her once, a quiet girl with nervous hands, always trailing behind him at hearings. Now she was a whistleblower, and her words hit like a hammer. She laid it all out. Camilla faking bids to overcharge clients, manipulating contracts, funneling kickbacks to big corporate contractors. Worse, Griffin knew. He'd helped cover it up, signing off on the lies. My breath caught as I read, the pages shaking in my hands. This was the smoking gun, and it wasn't just about the divorce anymore. It was criminal. I leaned back in the chair, the kitchen dark except for the glow of the lamp overhead, my mind racing. Kaylee's affidavit tied everything together, the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the payments to Elliot Reyes. Camilla had built Rhodes Interiors into a front, a shiny mask for something dirty, and I'd been too busy playing the loyal husband to see it. But now I saw. The FBI was circling, Thea Morgan's presence in those photos proof they were closing in. Delilah had confirmed it over the phone that morning. The feds are watching her company, money laundering through design contracts. Your folder probably tipped them off. I didn't know if I'd started this or just sped it up, but either way, I was in it now. The threats, the call, the break-in, weren't just Camilla's panic. They were her trying to plug a leak that was already flooding. My phone buzzed again as I sat there, another unknown number. I picked it up, my voice low. Yeah. A text popped up instead of a voice. You don't want to be part of this. My jaw tightened, and I typed back, too late. No reply came, but I didn't expect one. I set the phone down, my hands steady now, the affidavit still open in front of me. Whoever was texting, whoever had tailed Zaire, they thought they could scare me off. They didn't know me, not the real me, the guy who'd spent years building something only to watch it get stolen. I wasn't the silent husband anymore. I was the guy with proof, the guy who'd accidentally kicked over a hornet's nest, and I wasn't running from it. I called Noah that night, my voice quiet but firm. You still digging? He sighed, the sound crackling through the line. Yeah. Found more encrypted emails between Camilla and some guy named Jonas Fick. Took me hours to crack, but it's shady. Offshore accounts, coded transfers. I'll send it over. My heart picked up. Jonas Fick. I didn't know the name, but it felt heavy, like another piece I hadn't seen yet. Thanks, I said. Keep it safe. He laughed, short and dry. You too, man. This is getting wild. Wild didn't cover it. When the files hit my inbox, I skimmed them. Dates, amounts, cryptic messages about cleaning the books. It was more fuel, more ammo, and I added it to the growing pile. The affidavit, the photos, Noah's finds, it was a mountain now, and Camilla was standing at the bottom, about to get buried. I didn't sleep much that night, the house creaking around me, my mind too full to rest. The FBI angle changed everything. Thea Morgan wasn't meeting Camilla to chat about interior design. She was hunting, and I'd handed her a map with that folder in court. But I wasn't just a bystander anymore. The threats kept coming, subtle but real, and I knew Camilla's team was scrambling. Griffin's name on that affidavit meant he was sinking too, disbarment at best, jail at worst. I paced the living room, the photos and files spread out like a war plan, and felt the shift inside me. This wasn't about fairness or getting my share. It was bigger, messier, a fight I hadn't signed up for but couldn't walk away from. I was standing at the edge of something huge, and all I could do was keep pushing forward, one step at a time. The days after that affidavit landed in my hands felt like walking through a storm, everything moving fast, dark clouds closing in, but I kept my footing. I sat in the living room most nights, the lamp casting long shadows across the papers and files spread out on the coffee table, my laptop humming as I cross-checked every new piece Noah sent me. Kaylee Duran's words kept echoing in my head, Camilla faking bids, Griffin signing off on kickbacks, the whole shiny facade of Rhodes' interiors crumbling under the weight of her lies. I'd known she'd screwed me over, but this was a machine, a calculated grind that chewed up clients, investors, even me, all to keep her pockets full. The FBI was in it now, Special Agent Thea Morgan's face from those cafe photos stuck in my mind, and I was starting to feel the heat too. The threats weren't stopping, and they weren't subtle anymore. It started with another text that week, late at night while I was poring over Jonas Vic's encrypted emails. My phone buzzed, the screen lighting up the darkroom. You don't want to be part of this. Same message as before, same unknown number. I stared at it, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but I didn't type anything this time. Instead, I tossed the phone onto the couch and went back to the emails, dates, coded phrases, transfers to accounts I couldn't trace. Whoever was texting thought I'd scare easy, but they didn't get it. I was already in too deep, and every new threat just made me dig harder. The next morning, Zaire called, his voice tight. That black car was back last night, parked across my street for an hour. I'm fine, but this ain't random. My stomach twisted, but I kept my tone calm. Lay low, I told him. We're close. He grunted agreement, and I hung up, feeling the weight settle heavier on my shoulders. Delilah met me at a diner that afternoon, her eyes scanning the room before she slid into the booth across from me. She looked tired, the break-in still nagging at her, but her voice was steady. Kaylee's affidavit's gold, she said, keeping it low. The FBI's got it now, confirmed through a contact. They're building a case, and your folder gave them the push. I nodded, sipping my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me. What about the settlement? I asked. She smirked, just a little. Still on the table, but it's a panic move. Camilla's team knows the feds are sniffing around. They're hoping you'll take it and disappear. I set the mug down, my hands steady. Not happening, I said. This isn't about money anymore. She didn't argue, just gave me a look that said she'd known that all along. Back home, I kept working, the house quiet except for the rustle of papers and the occasional ping of my email. Noah's latest batch had more on Jonas Vic, some shady financial fixer with a trail of shell corporations stretching overseas. The emails tied him to Camilla, vague but damning, hints of cleaning up and moving assets. I added it to the pile, my mind racing. The affidavit had already blown the lid off, Kaylee spilling about fake bids and kickbacks. But this was the next layer, the deeper dirt. Griffin was in it too, his name popping up in the emails, and I could almost picture him sweating, his smug grin long gone. The FBI had the case now, Delilah said, and I wondered how much they'd already known before I handed over that folder. Then the threats ramped up again. I woke up one morning to find my car's windshield cracked, nothing stolen, just a spider web of glass like someone had taken a bat to it. No note, no witnesses, but I knew. I called Delilah, my voice low as I stood in the driveway staring at the damage. They're not stopping, I said. She didn't sugarcoat it. They're scared, and scared people get stupid. Keep everything locked down, files, doors, all of it. I nodded to myself, the cold air biting at my hands, and went back inside. That night, another text, last chance. I didn't reply, just screenshot it and sent it to Delilah and Noah. My hands didn't shake anymore. Anger had turned into something colder, something focused. They could smash my car, tell my friends, send their cryptic messages, but I wasn't the one running out of moves. I met Zaire the next day at a park, away from prying eyes, the wind rustling the trees around us. He handed me a USB drive, his face tense. More account logs Noah pulled, stuff from 2 years back. Matches Kaylee's story. I took it, slipping it into my pocket. You okay? I asked. He shrugged, but his eyes darted to the parking lot. I'll live. Just don't like the shadows. I clapped his shoulder, grateful, and headed home to plug it in. The logs were a goldmine, transactions mirroring the affidavit, payments to contractors who'd never worked a day, all signed off by Camilla and Griffin. It was airtight, and I knew the feds would eat it up. But I wasn't done. I wanted every loose end tied, every secret dragged into the light. By the end of the week, I sat in the dark again, the pile of evidence towering on the table. The FBI was moving, Camilla's team was cracking, and I was still here, the guy they'd underestimated. The threats kept coming, but they were noise now, desperate, flailing noise. I wasn't just fighting for me anymore. I was in the middle of something bigger, something that could take her down for good. And I was ready to see it through, no matter what they threw at me next. The final hearing crept up fast, and by the time I walked into that courtroom again, I felt like a man who'd been running a marathon, tired, but too stubborn to stop. The air was thick with tension, the kind you could feel in your bones, and I took my seat next to Delilah, my hands resting on the table, steady despite the storm inside me. Across the room, Camilla sat rigid, her face drawn tight, like she hadn't slept in days. Griffin was beside her, his tie slightly crooked, his usual swagger replaced by a twitchy edge. The folder I'd submitted weeks ago had done its damage, cracked their armor, set the FBI sniffing, but I wasn't done. I'd spent every night since then building more, digging deeper, and now I had one last play. The judge banged his gavel, the sound sharp in the quiet room, and called us to order. Closing statements, he said, his voice gruff. Let's wrap this up. Griffin stood first, his hand smoothing his jacket, trying to pull himself together. He launched into a speech, polished, rehearsed, all about how Camilla deserved the business, the house, everything, because she'd built it from the ground up. His voice was loud, confident at first, but I caught the cracks, the way his eyes flicked to me, the slight stumble over his words. He was nervous, and he should have been. The settlement offer was still on the table, bumped up since the last hearing, a fat stack of cash, and the house dangled like bait to make me go away. Delilah had forwarded it to me days ago, and I'd stared at it, tempted for half a second, freedom, a clean break, no more fighting. But I didn't come this far to cash out. I leaned forward as Griffin finished, my hands clasped, waiting my turn. The judge nodded at me. Mr. Rhodes. I stood, slow and deliberate, feeling every eye in the room on me. Your Honor, I said, my voice calm but firm, I have one final file. I reached into my briefcase, my fingers brushing the edges of the new folder, thicker than the last, packed with everything Noah and Zaire had pulled since the affidavit. The courtroom went still, a hush falling over it like someone had hit mute. I handed it to the bailiff, who carried it up to the judge, and I watched Camilla's face as he took it. Her eyes widened, her hands gripping the table, and I saw the panic flash across her, raw, unguarded. Griffin shot up, his voice sharp. Objection, Your Honor. This is irrelevant. A delay tactic. The judge didn't even look at him, just raised a hand. Sit down, he said, his tone hard enough to make Griffin drop back into his chair, his face red. The judge opened the folder, his glasses slipping down his nose as he started reading. I knew what was in there, emails tying Camilla to Jonas Vick, the financial fixer Noah had tracked, proof of shell corporations funneling money overseas, transactions that matched Kaylee's affidavit down to the dollar. I'd spent nights piecing it together, cross-checking dates, connecting dots until my eyes burned. This wasn't just about Rhodes Interiors anymore, it was international fraud, a web bigger than I'd ever imagined. The judge's face darkened with every page, his fingers pausing, then flipping back to double-check. I stood there, my heart pounding but my stance steady, letting the evidence do the talking. Camilla whispered something to Griffin, her voice low and frantic, but he just shook his head, his hands clenched on the table. They were sinking, and they knew it. The room stayed quiet, the only sound the rustle of paper as the judge worked through the file. He stopped halfway, looked up at Camilla, his eyes narrow. Ms. Rhodes, he said, these documents suggest serious misconduct, beyond the scope of this divorce. Can your counsel explain? Griffin fumbled, standing again, his words tripping over each other. Your Honor, this is unverified. It's not part of the proceedings. The judge cut him off, his voice like steel. It's part of my courtroom now. Sit. Griffin sank down, his face pale, and I caught Camilla's hands trembling in her lap. She turned to me then, her eyes wide, her voice a harsh whisper across the room. You don't know what you've done. I met her gaze, unflinching, and smiled, just a small, tight curve of my lips. I think I do, I said, loud enough for her to hear, soft enough to keep it between us. The judge kept reading, his expression growing grimmer, and I knew it was over, not just the hearing, but her whole game. Delilah leaned toward me, her voice a murmur. You've got her. This is the knockout. I nodded, barely moving, my eyes on the judge. He finished the last page, set the folder down, and rubbed his temples like it had given him a headache. This court will recess, he said finally. I'm referring these documents to the proper authorities. We're done here. The gavel banged, and the room erupted, Griffin arguing with the bailiff, Camilla staring at the table, her face drained of color. I stood there, the noise washing over me, feeling the weight lift just a little. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about ending it, about dragging every lie into the light. As we filed out, Delilah clapped me on the back, her grin sharp. You buried her, she said. I didn't smile back, just nodded, my mind already spinning ahead. Camilla's whisper stuck with me. You don't know what you've done. And I wondered what she meant. Was it a threat, a plea, or just the last gasp of someone who'd lost? I didn't know yet, but I'd find out. For now, I walked out of that courtroom, my head high, the folder's truth echoing behind me. She thought she could erase me. She was wrong. The week after the final hearing passed in a blur, like the world had sped up and left me standing still to catch my breath. Camilla's arrest hit the news 7 days later, handcuffs, a grim-faced mugshot. Rhodes Interiors splashed across headlines as suspected front for money laundering and fraud. I saw it on my phone, sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, the steam curling up in the quiet morning light. Her assets were frozen, the business collapsed overnight, clients pulling out faster than the feds could seize files. Griffin got disbarred within days, his name tied to the affidavit and those emails, his career torched. Jonas Fick, the shadowy fixer, vanished, no trace, no word, like he'd never existed. As for me, the judge's ruling came through. I got the house, a fair chunk of what was left of her accounts, and the satisfaction of knowing the truth had won. But it didn't feel like a win, not the way I'd expected. I stood in the living room that first night after the ruling, the house too big, too empty, every corner echoing with 15 years of a life that didn't exist anymore. The furniture was still there, the couch we'd picked out, the shelves I'd built, but it felt like someone else's now. I'd spent so long fighting, digging, proving I wasn't the nobody Camilla thought I was, and now it was over. The folder, the late nights, the threats, it had all led to this, and yet I didn't know what this was. I packed a small bag that evening, just clothes, a toothbrush, some papers, and locked the door behind me. The house could wait. I needed air, space, something new. I drove north, no real plan, just the hum of the road and the weight lifting off my chest with every mile. Pine Haven was where I landed, a quiet coastal town, all salt air and gray waves, far enough from the city to feel like a different world. The first morning there, I woke up in a rented cabin, the sound of the ocean creeping through the cracked window. No phone buzzing, no files to pore over, just the steady crash of water on rocks. I walked down to the beach, my shoes sinking into the sand, the wind tugging at my jacket. For the first time in years, I didn't have to be anywhere, didn't have to fix anything. I sat on a driftwood log, watching the tide roll in, and let my mind wander. Camilla's face flashed through it, her smirk in court, her panic at the end, but it didn't sting anymore. She'd lost everything, the business, the money, her freedom. I'd walked away with more than she'd ever meant to give me, but it wasn't about that. It was about me, about finally stepping out of her shadow and into something of my own. The days in Pine Haven stretched out slow and simple. I'd grab coffee at a little shop downtown, the barista nodding like I'd always been there. I'd walk the shore, picking up shells or just staring at the horizon, letting the salt air clear my head. The settlement money hit my account midweek, enough to start over, not enough to change the world, and I didn't touch it yet. I didn't need to. The house back home was mine to sell or keep, but I wasn't ready to decide. For now, this was enough. A bed, a roof, the sound of waves. I'd spent so long chasing justice, building that case, that I'd forgotten what it felt like to just breathe. Here, I remembered. One night, I sat on the cabin's porch with a beer, the sky dark and dotted with stars. My phone sat inside, off since I'd arrived, and I didn't miss it. Zaire had texted before I left. You good? And I'd said, yeah. Meaning it. Delilah called too, her voice sharp with pride. You took her down. You know that? I'd smiled, tired but real. We did, I'd said, because it wasn't just me, Zaire, Noah, her, even Kaylee, they'd all had a hand in it. But now they were back there, and I was here, alone in a way that didn't feel lonely. I tipped the bottle back, the cold fizz hitting my throat, and thought about the last 15 years. I'd been her shadow, quiet, steady, invisible, pouring myself into her dreams until mine faded. Now they were gone, reduced to evidence in a courtroom, and I was still standing. The next day, I walked into town, the streets quiet except for a few locals nodding hello. I stopped at a hardware store, bought a cheap fishing rod on impulse, figuring I'd try something new. Back at the beach, I cast the line out, the waves swallowing it, and waited. Nothing bit, but I didn't care. It wasn't about the fish. It was about the doing, the being, the space to figure out who I was without her. The sun dipped low, painting the water gold, and I reeled in the line, my hands steady. No revenge fantasies played in my head, no gloating over her arrest. That was done. This was mine, my time, my choice, my life. By the end of the week, I knew I'd stay in Pine Haven a while longer. The cabin was cheap, the air was clean, and the noise in my head was finally quiet. I wasn't celebrating, wasn't mourning, just living, one day at a time. I'd been her husband, her backbone, her ghost, but now I was just me. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The ocean rolled on, endless and steady, and I watched it, feeling like a man who'd finally walked away, not from her, but towards something better. My ex-wife became an investment banker and humiliated me in front of everyone just because I asked to invest $170. She sneered, "We don't serve poor beggars here." Minutes later, I withdraw my $8.5 billion portfolio, and the entire bank froze. My name is Reed Lawson, and let me tell you about the day I walked into Solon Trust Investment Bank with nothing but a crumpled $20 bill in my wallet and a dream that was about to turn into their worst nightmare. I wasn't looking for trouble that Tuesday morning. Hell, I was just trying to do something decent for once in my life. You know how it is when you find something you actually believe in? That's rare these days, especially in this godforsaken city where everyone's hustling and nobody gives a damn about anything except their next paycheck. The startup was called Greenleaf Solutions, some kid from Brooklyn who figured out how to turn food scraps into biodegradable packaging. Real smart kid, reminded me of myself 20 years ago when I still thought the world owed me something. Anyway, I'd been following their progress for months, watching them bootstrap their way through prototype after prototype, living off ramen noodles and hope. They needed investors, and I had exactly $170 burning a hole in my checking account. Not much, but hey, every giant oak started as an acorn, right? So there I was, walking through those ridiculous glass doors that probably cost more than most people make in a year, wearing my favorite pair of jeans, the ones with the hole near the left knee that my ex-wife always nagged me about, and a plain gray hoodie I'd picked up at Target. No fancy suit, no leather briefcase, no entourage of ass-kissing yes-men trailing behind me like some Wall Street hotshot. Just me, Reed Lawson, regular guy with calloused hands and a stubborn streak a mile wide. The lobby was all marble and chrome, the kind of place designed to make you feel small before you even open your mouth. Business people in $1,000 suits glided past like sharks in designer clothing, their phones glued to their ears, barking orders about acquisitions and leveraged buyouts. The whole scene reeked of old money and newer arrogance. I almost turned around right then, almost said forget it, and walked back out to my beat-up Honda Civic parked 3 blocks away because I wasn't about to pay $20 for valet parking. But I didn't. Something inside me, maybe it was stubbornness or maybe it was genuine hope, kept my feet moving toward the customer service counter. The woman behind the marble desk was typing away on her computer, not bothering to look up even though I'd been standing there for a solid minute. Professional courtesy, my ass. Finally, she raised her head, and that's when my world tilted sideways like a record player with a bent needle. Mira Glenmont. My ex-wife. The woman who'd walked out of our apartment 5 years ago with half our furniture, most of our savings, and all of my trust in human decency. She was wearing a power suit that probably cost more than I used to make in a month back when we were married. Her auburn hair pulled back in that severe bun she always wore when she was trying to intimidate someone. The years had been kind to her. She looked polished, successful, like she'd stepped out of a Forbes magazine spread about women breaking glass ceilings. For a split second, neither of us said anything. I could see the recognition dawning in her green eyes, followed quickly by something that looked suspiciously like disgust. Not surprise, not awkwardness, pure, undiluted disgust, like she'd just stepped in something unpleasant. Well, she said, her voice carrying that same condescending tone I remembered from our worst fights. Reed Lawson, what brings you to civilization? I cleared my throat, determined to keep this professional. I'd like to make an investment. Small amount, but it's for a good cause. There's this green energy startup. That's when she started laughing. Not a polite chuckle or even a surprised giggle, but a full-throated laugh that cut through the lobby's hushed atmosphere like a fire alarm. Heads turned. Conversations stopped. Even the security guard by the elevator looked over to see what was so damn funny. Investment, she said, loud enough for half the floor to hear. You want to make an investment? How much are we talking here, Reed? Your lunch money. My face burned, but I kept my voice steady. $170. The laughter got louder. A couple of junior executives at a nearby table started snickering, whispering to each other behind their hands like high school kids watching someone get pantsed in the cafeteria. Mira stood up from her chair, smoothing down her skirt with theatrical precision. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced to anyone within earshot, we have a high roller in the house. Reed Lawson wants to invest his pocket change in our institution. More laughter rippled through the lobby. A security camera in the corner seemed to stare down at me like a mechanical eye, recording every humiliating second. Then came the words that would change everything. We don't serve poor beggars here. The room went dead silent. Not the comfortable quiet of a library or the focused hush of people working, but the kind of silence that happens right before a storm hits, when even the birds stop singing because they know something bad is coming. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, feeling dozens of eyes boring into me, watching to see how the beggar would react to being put in his place. Part of me wanted to argue, to defend myself, to explain that I wasn't some homeless guy wandering in off the street looking for a handout. Another part wanted to slink away with my tail between my legs, disappear into the crowd on the sidewalk outside, and pretend this whole thing never happened. Instead, I did something that probably surprised everyone in that lobby, including myself. I smiled. Not a bitter, sarcastic smile or a wounded attempt at saving face, but a genuine, almost peaceful smile. I nodded once at Mira, like she'd just told me something interesting about the weather, and turned toward the exit. But as I walked away, my mind was already working, already calculating, already planning. Because Mira Glenmont had just made the biggest mistake of her professional life, and she had absolutely no idea what was coming. The glass doors closed behind me with a soft whoosh, and I stepped back into the real world where regular people drove regular cars and worried about regular problems. But I wasn't a regular person anymore, and I hadn't been for a very long time. I just let them all believe I was. Nobody in that fancy marble palace knew who the hell they were really dealing with, and honestly, that's exactly how I'd planned it for the past 5 years. See, when you've been burned as badly as I had, you learn to keep your cards close to your chest, so close that even your own reflection doesn't know what you're holding. The whole sorry mess started right after Mira walked out on our marriage. I remember that day like it was yesterday. Came home from my construction job to find half our apartment cleaned out and a note on the kitchen counter that might as well have been written in poison ink. Reed, it said, I can't waste any more of my life waiting for you to become somebody. Don't try to find me. Real classy, right? She'd even taken the coffee maker, which honestly hurt more than losing her at that point. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build on. 3 weeks after she split, I got the call that changed everything. My grandfather's lawyer, some old-school guy named Patterson who wore bow ties and still used a rotary phone, told me I'd inherited something from the old man. Grandpa Joe had always been the family mystery, the guy who worked nights at the rail yard but somehow managed to send 3 kids to college and buy a house on the lake. Turns out, that wasn't all he'd managed to do. Your grandfather was quite the investor, Patterson had said, sliding a manila folder across his desk that looked like it weighed about 10 pounds. He left specific instructions that this inheritance was to remain confidential until you turned 35. Congratulations, son, You just became a very wealthy man. Wealthy didn't even begin to cover it. Grandpa Joe had spent 40 years quietly buying up small parcels of land, investing in tiny companies that nobody else believed in, and rolling every penny of profit back into the next opportunity. By the time he passed, his portfolio was worth just north of $3 million. Not billionaire money, sure, but enough to make a man think twice about his next move. Most people would have bought a fancy car or a bigger apartment, maybe taken a trip to Europe or thrown themselves a party. Me? I disappeared. Completely. Told everyone I was going to find myself, maybe travel the country, figure out what I wanted to do with my life. Classic post-divorce midlife crisis stuff that nobody questioned. Instead, I spent 6 months holed up in a one-bedroom studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant in Queens, reading everything I could get my hands on about finance, investment strategies, and corporate structures. I devoured books on Warren Buffett, Ray Dalio, and every other investing legend who'd ever made a dollar in the market. I studied shell companies, private equity firms, and offshore banking laws until my eyes bled. Most importantly, I learned how to stay invisible while making very visible moves in the financial world. That's when K. Ramil was born. Sounds sophisticated, doesn't it? Like some European aristocrat, or maybe a mysterious billionaire from a spy novel. Truth is, it's just my middle name, Kendrick, and my grandmother's maiden name turned backward. Simple, but it did the job. K. Ramil became the face of Redbridge Equities, a private investment firm that specialized in finding diamonds in the rough. While Mira was climbing the corporate ladder at Solon Trust, schmoozing with clients and playing office politics, I was quietly building an empire. Started small, bought into a struggling tech company that was developing better battery technology. When Tesla started taking off, guess who had a supply contract locked up? Moved into renewable energy next, then pharmaceutical startups, then real estate development in markets that everyone else was sleeping on. The beautiful thing about being K. Ramil was that nobody connected him to Reed Lawson, the construction worker from Brooklyn whose wife had left him for being a loser. Reed Lawson drove a beat-up Honda and lived in a studio apartment. K. Ramil owned a portfolio worth billions and had meeting requests from Fortune 500 CEOs. But here's the real kicker, the part that would have made Myra's head explode if she'd known. Half of K. Ramil's massive portfolio was being managed by none other than Solon Trust Investment Bank. Through a network of third-party custodians and shell companies, Redbridge Equities had quietly become one of their biggest clients. Every month, Solon Trust was collecting management fees on investments that ultimately belonged to the same guy they'd just called a beggar. I'd watch from the shadows as they published their quarterly reports, bragging about their assets under management, their stellar performance numbers, their exclusive client relationships. They'd throw parties celebrating their success, give interviews about their investment prowess, and all the while, they were dancing to music played by a ghost they didn't even know existed. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mira had spent years working her way up to senior VP, handling accounts worth hundreds of millions, building relationships with high-net-worth individuals, and she'd never once realized that her biggest client was the same man she'd written off as worthless. Every quarterly statement that crossed her desk, every portfolio review she conducted, every client meeting she attended, somewhere in that mix was money that traced back to Reed Lawson, the failure she'd married and divorced. The construction worker who couldn't afford to take her to nice restaurants was now funding the very bonuses that paid for her designer suits. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about building something real while everyone else was playing pretend. While they were impressed by titles and corner offices, I was creating actual value, actual wealth, actual power. The kind that doesn't need a nameplate on a door or a reserved parking space. But sitting on that bench outside Solon Trust, watching Myra's laughter echo through those glass walls, I realized something important. Sometimes the most powerful move isn't the one nobody sees coming. Sometimes it's the one that reminds everyone exactly who they're dealing with. The bench outside Solon Trust was one of those fancy wrought iron jobs that the city puts up to make downtown look classy, but it might as well have been a throne for what I was about to do. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, just watching the suits hurry past on the sidewalk, all of them too busy checking their phones to notice the guy in jeans who was about to bring down one of the biggest investment banks in the state. Funny thing about power, real power, not the kind that comes with a corner office and a secretary, is that it's quietest right before it makes the most noise. I pulled out my phone, an old iPhone that I'd had for 3 years because, hey, if it ain't broke, why fix it? The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to move more money with this beat-up piece of technology than most people see in a lifetime. Ida Moreno's number was the third one in my favorites list, right after my pizza place and my barber. That should tell you something about my priorities. Ida had been my legal counsel for 4 years, ever since I'd needed someone sharp enough to handle the increasingly complex web of shell companies and investment vehicles that made up the K. Ramil empire. She was a bulldog in a Chanel suit, the kind of lawyer who could find loopholes in a circle and make opposing counsel cry for their mothers. The phone rang twice before her crisp voice came through. "Reed, this is unexpected. Aren't you supposed to be keeping a low profile today?" "Change of plans," I said, watching a hot dog vendor set up his cart across the street. Amazing how normal life just keeps on rolling even when you're about to drop a financial nuclear bomb. "I need you to initiate full asset withdrawal from Solon Trust." There was a pause. With Ida, pauses meant she was already 3 steps ahead, calculating angles and consequences like a chess grandmaster. "Define full, Reed. All $8.5 billion. Every penny that Redbridge has tied up in their investment vehicles, their managed funds, their custodial accounts, everything. I want it gone by close of business today." Another pause, longer this time. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. That's going to cause some serious waves. Solon Trust probably doesn't have that kind of liquidity sitting around in cash. They'll have to start selling positions, calling in favors, maybe even hit up other banks for emergency loans. "Good," I said, and I meant it. "Let them scramble." "What happened in there, Reed? This isn't like you. You're usually Mr. Patience, Mr. Long-Term Strategy. This feels," she searched for the right word, "personal." I looked up at the glass tower looming over me. Somewhere up there behind those tinted windows, Mira was probably still laughing with her colleagues about the beggar who wanted to invest his lunch money. It is personal, but it's also business. Bad business to insult clients, even small ones. Especially when you don't know who you're really dealing with. "All right," Ida said, and I could hear papers shuffling in the background. "I'll start with the offshore accounts first. Those will be the easiest to move without triggering immediate red flags. Then I'll hit the domestic portfolios. This is going to be like pulling the bottom card out of a house of cards. You realize that, right? That's the idea. And when they start asking questions, because they will, probably within the hour. Solon Trust's risk management department isn't stupid. They'll know something's up when their biggest ghost client suddenly vanishes. I stood up from the bench, stretching my legs and watching a pigeon peck at a discarded bagel. Amazing how simple life was when you were a pigeon. See food, eat food, fly away. No complicated revenge schemes or billion-dollar chess moves. Tell them the truth. Tell them Reed Lawson requested the withdrawal. Reed Lawson? Not K. Ramil. Reed Lawson. The construction worker. The failure. The beggar. I started walking toward my car, each step feeling lighter than the last. I want them to know exactly who just pulled the rug out from under them. Jesus, Reed. What did they do to you in there? I stopped walking, remembering Myra's laugh, the way it had cut through the lobby like a knife. They reminded me why I left this world behind in the first place, and why I built a better one without them. Okay, I'm on it. But Reed, you need to understand what this means. Once I pull the trigger on this, there's no going back. Solon Trust is going to be in full panic mode. Their stock price will probably tank when word gets out. People are going to lose jobs. Retirement accounts are going to take a hit. Then maybe they should have thought about that before they decided to humiliate someone just trying to do a good deed. Fair enough. I'll also notify the Financial Regulatory Board, just to make sure everything's above board on our end. If Solon Trust tries to freeze the accounts or claim some kind of irregularity, I want us bulletproof from a legal standpoint. Good thinking. How long until the first domino falls? 20 minutes, maybe 30. I'll start with the European markets. They're still open, and we can move about $2 billion through our London partners before Solon Trust even knows what hit them. Then I'll cascade through Asia Pacific, and by the time New York realizes what's happening, we'll be pulling the domestic portfolios. I reached my Honda and fished the keys out of my pocket. The parking meter still had 40 minutes left on it, but I had a feeling I wouldn't be needing it. Do it, Reed. For what it's worth, I think they picked the wrong guy to mess with. Yeah, I said, looking back up at the glass tower one more time. They really did. I hung up and sat in my car, engine running, air conditioning blowing, watching the pedestrians go about their normal Tuesday afternoon routines. In about 20 minutes, the elevators in that building were going to start moving a lot faster, carrying a lot more panicked people than usual. Risk managers would be pulling up spreadsheets, account executives would be frantically calling clients, and somewhere in that maze of marble and chrome, Mira Glenmont was about to learn that some jokes cost more than others. The beauty of it was, I didn't have to do anything else. I'd given the order, Ida would execute it, and gravity would take care of the rest. Sometimes the most devastating attacks are the ones where you just step back and let your enemy's own system collapse under the weight of their mistakes. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving Solentrust in my rearview mirror. By tomorrow morning, they'd remember this day as the one where everything changed. And they'd remember Reed Lawson as the man who changed it. Inside the glass tower of Solentrust, the first sign of trouble came as a soft ping from Martin Yoon's computer at exactly 2:47 p.m. Martin had been the head of risk management for 8 years, long enough to know that in the investment world, soft pings usually meant loud problems were heading your way like a freight train with busted brakes. He glanced at his monitor while finishing his turkey sandwich, the same boring lunch he'd been eating for the past decade because his wife insisted it was healthier than the pizza he actually wanted. The alert was routine at first glance. Large portfolio movement, European markets. Nothing unusual there. Rich clients moved money around all the time, especially when they were trying to beat currency fluctuations or chase better returns in overseas markets. But then another ping, and another. Within 5 minutes, his screen looked like a Christmas tree having an epileptic fit, alerts cascading down faster than he could read them. Portfolio withdrawal, account 47291, liquidation notice, London division, emergency transfer protocol, K. Remiel Holdings. Martin's sandwich suddenly tasted like cardboard. K. Remiel was their whale, the mysterious billionaire whose investment vehicles represented nearly 15% of Solentrust's total assets under management. In the banking world, 15% might not sound like much, but when you're talking about billions of dollars, 15% was the difference between champagne bonuses and cardboard boxes filled with personal belongings. What the hell? Martin muttered, his fingers flying across the keyboard as he pulled up the detailed transaction logs. The numbers that popped up on his screen made his stomach drop faster than a broken elevator. $2 billion had just vanished from their European portfolios. Not moved, not transferred, vanished, pulled out completely by K. Remiel's investment firm, Redbridge Equities. His phone started ringing before he could fully process what he was seeing. The caller ID showed London office, urgent. Martin, we've got a situation, came the voice of Sarah Chun, Solentrust's European operations manager. She sounded like she'd been running a marathon while drinking espresso. Redbridge just pulled everything. Every single position, every managed fund, every custodial account. They're liquidating their entire European portfolio. How much? Martin asked, though he already knew the answer would make him want to start drinking at 3 in the afternoon. 2.3 billion. They gave us the standard notice periods, so it's all legal, but Jesus Christ, Martin, this is like watching someone yank the foundation out from under a skyscraper. Martin's other line started blinking, then his cell phone. Then the emergency alert system that was supposed to be reserved for actual emergencies, not random Tuesday afternoons when mysterious billionaires decided to take their ball and go home. Sarah, I've got to call you back. Sounds like London was just the appetizer. He hung up and grabbed the next call. Yoon here. Martin, this is Tokyo. We've got multiple Redbridge accounts liquidating simultaneously. What's the word from your end? Before Martin could answer, his computer chimed again. This time, it wasn't a soft ping. It was the angry red alert that meant someone somewhere was about to have a very bad day. Liquidity warning. Domestic portfolios, screamed the message. Estimated withdrawal. For $0.2 billion. Immediate execution requested. Oh, shit, Martin whispered, loud enough that Jennifer from compliance looked over from her cubicle with raised eyebrows. Martin never swore at work. Martin was the guy who said darn when he spilled coffee on his tie. His desk phone rang again. This time the caller ID just said CEO Direct Line. Martin. The voice belonged to James Thornton, Solon Trust CEO, and he sounded like a man watching his retirement fund evaporate in real time. My office. Now. And bring whoever's in charge of the Ramil account. Sir, that would be. Well, technically the account is handled through our third-party custodial services, so I don't care if it's handled by trained monkeys. Find out who knows something about this and get them up here. We've got board members calling, asking why our stock price just dropped 12% in the last 20 minutes. Martin's blood pressure spiked. If the stock price was already moving, that meant word was getting out. In the financial world, rumors traveled faster than bad sushi through a wedding reception. On my way, sir. He grabbed his laptop and started jogging toward the elevator, his mind racing through the implications. If Redbridge was pulling out completely, they'd have to liquidate positions across multiple markets to cover the withdrawals. That meant selling stocks, bonds, commodities, everything, at whatever price they could get. In a forced liquidation, you didn't get to wait for good prices. You took what the market gave you and hoped you'd still have a job tomorrow. The elevator ride to the executive floor felt like it took about 6 years. Martin's phone buzzed with text messages from colleagues, traders, and account managers, all asking the same basic question. What the hell is happening? Meanwhile, 3 floors down in the customer service area, Mira Glenmont was holding court in the break room, still riding the high of her performance art from earlier. She'd gathered a small audience of junior associates and was regaling them with an exaggerated version of her encounter with the pathetic beggar who'd wanted to invest his pocket change. You should have seen his face, Mira was saying, making grand gestures with her coffee cup. This loser in his ratty jeans and hoodie, asking to invest $170 like he was some kind of high roller. I mean, what kind of person shows up at an investment bank with lunch money? Her audience chuckled appropriately, the way people do when their boss is telling a story and they want to keep their jobs. Nobody mentioned that most of them had started their own investment portfolios with amounts that weren't much bigger than Reed's $170. Nobody wanted to be the next target of Mira's wit. The best part, Mira continued, was when I told him we don't serve poor beggars. You could hear a pin drop in that lobby. Pure theater. That's when Martin Yoon burst through the break room door like a man whose hair was on fire, his laptop clutched against his chest, and his face the color of week-old milk. Mira, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. What did you do to a man named Reed Lawson? The laughter in the room died like someone had flipped a switch. Mira blinked, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. What? Reed Lawson. Earlier today. What exactly did you say to him? Mira's confident smirk faltered. He's nobody, Martin. Just some random guy who wandered in off the street wanting to invest his allowance. What? Martin's laptop chimed with another alert. He glanced at the screen and watched his career flash before his eyes. Because Reed Lawson is listed as the primary contact for every single account associated with Redbridge Equities. And Redbridge just pulled $8.5 billion out of our bank. The break room went quiet enough to hear the coffee machine gurgling in the corner. Mira's face went from confident to confused to absolutely terrified in about 3 seconds flat. That's impossible, she whispered. Martin looked at her with the expression of a man watching the Titanic's captain insist there was no iceberg. Tell that to our stock price. By noon, the executive boardroom on the 42nd floor of Solon Trust looked like a war room during the final days of a losing battle. The mahogany table that usually hosted polite discussions about quarterly projections and client retention strategies was now covered with laptops, tablets, printed spreadsheets, and enough empty coffee cups to caffeinate a small army. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a spectacular view of the city skyline, but nobody was admiring the scenery today. Mira sat in one of the leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars, but she might as well have been sitting on a bed of nails. Her perfectly styled hair was starting to show signs of stress. A few strands had escaped from her professional bun, and she kept tucking them behind her ear in a nervous gesture that would have been cute if the circumstances weren't so dire. The power suit that had made her feel invincible this morning now felt like armor that was about 3 sizes too small. Around the table sat the heavy hitters of Solon Trust's executive team. James Thornton, the CEO, who looked like he'd aged 5 years in the past 2 hours. Patricia Wells, the chief financial officer, who was frantically scribbling calculations on a legal pad, David Chong, the head of client relations, who kept checking his phone like he was expecting a miracle, and Martin Yun, still clutching his laptop like a life preserver, his tie loosened and his usually perfect composure completely shot. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Thornton was saying, his voice carrying the kind of deadly calm that precedes volcanic eruptions. "Our largest private client, representing 15% of our total assets under management, has just liquidated his entire portfolio because one of our senior VPs decided to publicly humiliate him in our lobby." Mira opened her mouth to defend herself, but Thornton held up a hand that could have stopped traffic. "I'm not finished. This client, who we apparently never bothered to properly identify despite managing $8.5 billion of his money, walked into our bank asking to invest $170, presumably as a test of our customer service, and our response was to call him a beggar in front of a room full of witnesses." The silence in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Outside, the city hummed with its normal afternoon energy, but inside this boardroom, it felt like the end of the world was being discussed in hushed, professional tones. That's when the conference room door opened, and I walked in. I'll admit, I put a little more effort into my appearance this time. Still no $1,000 suit. That would have been too obvious, but I'd swapped the hoodie for a clean button-down shirt and thrown on a sport jacket that I'd bought off the rack at Men's Warehouse 3 years ago. The same jeans, though. Some things don't change. The reaction was immediate and electric. Myra's face went white as fresh snow, her mouth falling open like she'd just seen a ghost walk through the wall. Thornton started to stand, then seemed to remember he didn't know who the hell I was supposed to be. The others just stared, trying to figure out if I was Reed Lawson the construction worker or K. Ramil the billionaire, because apparently their brains couldn't process the idea that both could be the same person. "Gentlemen, Mira." I nodded politely as I took the empty chair at the head of the table, the one usually reserved for Thornton during board meetings. Nobody stopped me. In situations like this, confidence is 90% of the game, and I've been playing this particular game for 5 years. Martin cleared his throat nervously. "Mr. Ramil? Mr. Lawson? I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to." "Reed is fine," I said, pulling a manila folder from my jacket and placing it on the table. The folder was thick enough to be impressive, but not so thick as to be intimidating. Inside were the transfer authorization forms that Ida had prepared, along with a few other documents that would make this meeting very short and very final. "I know this is all a bit confusing, so let me clear things up." I opened the folder and slid a single sheet of paper toward the center of the table. The letterhead read Redbridge Equities in simple, elegant font, and the document itself was titled Transfer Authorization, Complete Portfolio Closure, $8.5 billion. "This morning, I came to your bank as Reed Lawson, construction worker, hoping to make a small investment in a company I believe in. I was treated like garbage by someone who should have known better." I looked directly at Mira, who seemed to be having trouble breathing. "This afternoon, I'm here as K. Ramil, founder of Redbridge Equities, to formally notify you that we're terminating our business relationship." Thornton found his voice first. "Mr. Lawson, Mr. Ramil, surely we can work something out. What happened this morning was completely unacceptable, and I assure you that appropriate disciplinary action will be taken. Perhaps we could discuss some form of compensation for the inconvenience." $15 million, I said quietly. The room went silent again. Thornton blinked. "I'm sorry. $15 million. That's what Solon Trust made in management fees from my accounts last year. Not bad for managing the money of a beggar, wouldn't you say?" Mira made a sound that was somewhere between a whimper and a gasp. She was staring at the documents on the table like they were written in ancient hieroglyphics, her brain apparently unable to process the numbers she was seeing. "The withdrawal is already in progress," I continued, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. "By close of business today, every penny that Redbridge has invested through Solon Trust will be gone. Your European divisions have already processed their liquidations. Asia Pacific is wrapping up now. The domestic portfolios should be cleared within the next 2 hours." Patricia Wells, the CFO, finally spoke up. "Mr. Ramil, you have to understand, a withdrawal of this magnitude will have serious consequences, not just for Solon Trust, but for the broader market. When word gets out that we've lost a client of your caliber, then you shouldn't have insulted me, I said simply. I stood up, leaving the folder on the table. The paperwork is all there. My legal team has already filed the necessary notifications with the regulatory authorities. Everything is completely above board and by the book. I walked around the table to where Mira was sitting, her hands shaking as she stared at the transfer documents. She looked up at me with eyes that were equal parts terror and disbelief. This isn't about revenge, Mira, I said quietly, just loud enough for the room to hear. This is about respect, something you never learned to give. I straightened up and looked around the table at the assembled executives, these masters of the financial universe who were learning that universe was bigger than they'd thought. Gentlemen, it's been educational. Mira, it's been enlightening. I walked toward the door, then paused with my hand on the handle. Oh, and James. I looked back at the CEO, who was still staring at the paperwork like it might disappear if he concentrated hard enough. You might want to start working on your press release. This story's going to be all over the financial news by tomorrow morning. The door closed behind me with a soft click, and I left them to contemplate the wreckage of their afternoon. 42 floors below, the city continued its normal rhythm, completely unaware that one of its most respected investment banks had just learned a very expensive lesson about customer service. The elevator ride down from the 42nd floor felt like a victory lap in reverse. Instead of celebrating, I was watching the numbers tick down while knowing that behind me, 42 stories up, some of the smartest financial minds in the city were probably losing their collective shit trying to figure out how to stop a financial avalanche that was already halfway down the mountain. My phone buzzed as I hit the lobby. Text from Ida. European transfers complete. Asia Pacific wrapping up ahead of schedule. Domestic portfolios liquidating now. You've officially become Solon Trust's worst nightmare. I smiled as I pushed through the same glass doors I'd entered through this morning. The security guard who'd watched Mira humiliate me earlier gave me a polite nod, completely oblivious to the fact that the guy in jeans had just cost his employer more money than most small countries make in a year. Amazing how invisible you can be when people don't expect to see you. My Honda was still parked 3 blocks away, right where I'd left it, with 2 minutes left on the meter. I fed it another quarter out of habit. Old patterns die hard, even when you're rich enough to buy the entire parking authority. As I drove away from downtown, my phone started buzzing like an angry hornet. The first call was from a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail. Then another. Then 3 more in quick succession. Word was already spreading through the financial grapevine faster than gossip at a high school reunion. In the investment world, news like this travels at light speed, especially when it involves amounts that could fund a small war. But the call that made me pull over came from a number I definitely recognized. Mira. I stared at the screen for a long moment, watching her name flash like a neon sign advertising desperation. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what she had to say now that the tables had been completely flipped. The other part of me remembered her laughter echoing through that marble lobby, the way she'd announced my poverty to a room full of strangers like it was the funniest thing she'd ever heard. I declined the call. Immediately, my phone buzzed with a text. Read, please. We need to talk. This is insane. Then another. You can't be serious about this. $8 billion over a misunderstanding. Then, answer your damn phone. I turned the phone face down and kept driving. Behind me, though I couldn't see it from my Honda, Solon Trust was erupting into the kind of controlled chaos that happens when very smart people realize they're about to become very unemployed people. Martin Yoon was probably running between departments like a man whose hair was on fire, trying to coordinate damage control across 3 continents and 5 time zones. The legal department was undoubtedly scrambling to find some clause, some technicality, some Hail Mary loophole that could stop the bleeding. But Ida Moreno was too good at her job for that kind of amateur hour bullshit. Every document had been filed correctly, every notice period observed, every regulatory requirement satisfied down to the last comma. Redbridge Equities wasn't breaking any rules. We were just taking our ball and going home, which was perfectly legal when you owned the ball and the court it was played on. The beauty of what was happening was its simplicity. No complex schemes, no insider trading, no regulatory violations that would bring federal investigators sniffing around. Just a straightforward business decision made by a client who no longer felt valued by his service provider. It was capitalism in its purest form. Vote with your wallet, and when your wallet has $8.5 billion in it, your vote carries a lot of weight. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mira. You've ruined me. I pulled into a gas station parking lot and sat there for a moment, engine running, air conditioning humming, staring at those 4 words on my screen. You've ruined me. As if what happened in that lobby had been some kind of natural disaster, some random act of God that she couldn't have prevented. I typed back, no, Mira. You did that when you laughed in my face. Then I blocked her number. The truth was, I hadn't ruined Mira Glenmont. Mira Glenmont had ruined Mira Glenmont the moment she decided that a person's worth could be measured by the balance in their checking account. She'd ruined herself when she chose cruelty over kindness, when she picked public humiliation over simple courtesy, when she forgot that every person who walks through those glass doors deserves basic human dignity, regardless of how much money they want to invest. What I'd done was simply reveal the consequences of her choices. I'd held up a mirror and shown her what it looks like when the universe decides to balance the scales. Some people call it karma. Some call it justice. I just called it business. Back at Solon Trust, the emergency protocols were in full swing. James Thornton was probably on a conference call with the board of directors, trying to explain how their most profitable client had vanished in the span of a single afternoon. The PR department was likely crafting carefully worded statements about strategic portfolio realignments and mutual business decisions, because nobody wanted to admit that their senior VP had insulted a billionaire and cost the company its biggest account. The fund managers were scrambling to liquidate positions without crashing the prices of the stocks they were selling. When you need to dump several $1 billion worth of assets in a matter of hours, you don't get to be picky about timing or market conditions. You sell at whatever price you can get and hope the bleeding stops before you hit an artery. Meanwhile, the compliance department was probably pulling every email, every transaction record, every piece of documentation related to the Redbridge accounts, looking for any sign that they'd missed something important. They'd find plenty of red flags in hindsight: mysterious shell companies, offshore accounts, complex investment structures that should have triggered additional due diligence. But hindsight is always 20/20 when you're staring at a financial crater where your biggest client used to be. The irony was that they'd been managing K. Ramil's money flawlessly for years. The returns were solid, the fees were reasonable, the service was professional. If Mira had simply treated Reed Lawson with basic courtesy this morning, if she'd taken his $170 investment with a smile and a thank you, none of this would have happened. Redbridge would still be Solon Trust's whale client, generating millions in annual fees, and Mira would still be a rising star with a corner office and a bright future. Instead, she was probably sitting in that same corner office right now, staring at her computer screen and watching her career implode in real time. All because she forgot the first rule of customer service. Treat every customer like they might be your most important one, because you never know when they actually are. 2 days later, I was sitting on the deck of my lake house with my morning coffee and a copy of the Financial Tribune spread out on the weathered wooden table that my grandfather had built with his own hands back in 1967. The lake was glass smooth in the early morning light, reflecting the pine trees on the far shore like a mirror that had never heard of bad news or corporate disasters. A loon called out somewhere in the distance, probably wondering why the hell humans made everything so complicated when life could be as simple as fishing for breakfast and taking naps in the sun. The lake house had been my refuge for the past 5 years, the place where Reed Lawson could exist without worrying about K. Ramil's portfolio or Redbridge Equity's next acquisition. It was a modest place by billionaire standards: 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, a kitchen that still had the original appliances from the 80s, and a deck that had seen better decades. But it was mine, paid for with honest money from my grandfather's inheritance. And it was the one place on earth where I could drink coffee from a chipped mug and not give a damn about stock prices or quarterly reports. The newspaper felt different that morning, heavier somehow, like it was carrying more weight than usual. And there, on page 3 of the business section, was the headline I'd been expecting. Solon Trust issues public apology following client incident. I leaned back in my chair, an old Adirondack number that creaked like a ship in a storm, and read the article with the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching karma finally cash a check that's been a long time coming. Solon Trust Investment Bank issued a formal public apology yesterday following an incident that resulted in the departure of one of their largest private clients. The bank's CEO, James Thornton, acknowledged that a senior executive had treated a potential client inappropriately during a recent visit to their downtown headquarters. I had to laugh at that. Inappropriately was corporate speak for like a complete asshole. But newspapers had to keep things family-friendly. The article continued with the usual boilerplate language about regrettable incidents and commitment to excellence. But buried in the middle was the line that made my coffee taste even better. We sincerely apologize to Mr. Reed Lawson for a regrettable incident involving one of our senior executives. Respect and integrity remain our core values, and we are taking immediate steps to ensure that all clients, regardless of the size of their investment, receive the professional treatment they deserve. There it was, in black and white, for every financial professional in the country to read over their morning bagels and overpriced lattes. Solon Trust Investment Bank, the same institution that had called me a beggar 2 days ago, was now publicly kissing my ass in the financial equivalent of a full-page apology ad. But the real kicker came in the final paragraph, buried where casual readers might miss it, but industry insiders would catch every word. The bank also announced the resignation of Senior Vice President Mira Glenmont, effective immediately. Ms. Glenmont had been with Solon Trust for 7 years and was considered a rising star in the organization's client relations division. I read that sentence 3 times, savoring each word like fine wine. Mira Glenmont, the woman who'd married me when I was nobody and divorced me when I was still nobody, the woman who'd built her career on climbing over other people to reach the next rung of the corporate ladder, was now officially unemployed. Not transferred, not demoted, not given a quiet desk job in some back office where she could ride out the storm. Resigned. In the corporate world, resigned usually meant fired, but we're letting you keep your dignity on the way out the door. I folded the newspaper and walked inside to my office, a converted bedroom that held my computer, a few filing cabinets, and the world's most comfortable desk chair that I'd bought from a bankruptcy auction 3 years ago. On the wall above my desk hung a simple wooden frame containing 2 photographs. One of my grandfather in his railroad overalls, grinning at the camera with dirt under his fingernails and pride in his eyes. The other of my grandmother in her garden, wearing a sun hat and holding a basket of tomatoes that she'd grown from seeds. Below those photos, I had pinned a quote that my grandmother used to say whenever the neighbors gossiped about people who'd fallen on hard times. Let your silence plant seeds. When it blooms, they'll choke on their own weeds. I unpinned the newspaper clipping and placed it in the frame, right below Grandma's picture. The irony wasn't lost on me. The woman who'd taught me about patience and quiet strength would have appreciated the symmetry of this moment. She'd always believed that people who treated others badly would eventually face consequences for their actions, that the universe had a way of settling accounts when you least expected it. The newspaper article would look perfect there, a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or flashy or dramatic. Sometimes it's just letting people face the natural consequences of their own choices, letting them choke on their own weeds while you tend to your own garden. My phone buzzed with a text from Ida. Saw the Tribune article. I'm assuming you're feeling pretty satisfied this morning. I typed back. Justice tastes like good coffee and better newspaper headlines. What's next? Media interviews? Victory laps around Wall Street. I looked out the window at the lake, where a family of ducks was paddling by in perfect formation, completely unconcerned with human drama or corporate politics. Nothing. I'm going fishing. And that was the truth. I'd made my point. Solon Trust had learned their lesson, and Mira was facing the consequences of her choices. The money was already being put to better use through my Community Futures Fund, supporting the kind of people that Mira would have called beggars, but who I knew were just folks trying to build something better for themselves and their families. The beautiful thing about real power is that once you've used it, you don't need to keep flexing it. The world had seen what happened when someone disrespected Reed Lawson, and that lesson would ripple through the financial community for years to come. Every banker, every investment advisor, every customer service representative would think twice before dismissing someone based on their appearance or the size of their initial investment. I poured myself another cup of coffee and headed back out to the deck. The sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning mist and revealing the lake in all its natural glory. Somewhere in the city, people were reading about Solon Trust's public humiliation over their breakfast meetings and power lunches. Somewhere else, Mira was probably staring at her phone, wondering how her life had gone from corner office to unemployment line in the span of 48 hours. But here on the lake, surrounded by pine trees and morning birdsong, none of that mattered. Here, I was just Reed Lawson, grandson of a railroad worker, sitting on a deck his grandfather had built, drinking coffee from a chipped mug, and watching the world be exactly as peaceful as it was supposed to be. The newspaper clipping would stay in that frame for as long as I lived in this house, not as a trophy or a monument to revenge, but as a simple reminder that treating people with respect costs nothing and treating them badly can cost everything. Pulling $8.5 billion out of Solon Trust was just the opening move in a chess game that most people didn't even know they were watching. The real satisfaction came 3 weeks later when I sat in my Honda, still the same beat-up car, because some things don't need to change just because your bank account has more zeros, outside the offices of Meridian Community Bank, a small institution that specialized in microloans and neighborhood development projects. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. Where Solon Trust was all marble lobbies and intimidating glass towers designed to make regular people feel small, Meridian operated out of a converted Victorian house in a working-class neighborhood where kids still played stickball in the streets and old-timers sat on stoops arguing about baseball. The kind of place where a guy in jeans and a hoodie didn't stand out like a sore thumb. I'd done my homework on Meridian's president, Maria Santos, a former social worker who'd gotten tired of watching good people get turned down for loans just because they didn't have perfect credit scores or trust fund collateral. She'd started the bank with the radical idea that character mattered more than quarterly profit margins, that sometimes the best investments were the ones that helped single mothers start catering businesses or helped veterans open auto repair shops. The meeting lasted exactly 47 minutes. I walked in as Reed Lawson, construction worker with a crazy idea, and walked out having just committed the entire $8.5 billion to something I was calling the Community Futures Fund. Not a loan, not an investment expecting massive returns, but a nonprofit portfolio designed to do exactly what Solon Trust had never bothered to consider: actually help people. The irony was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. The same money that Solon Trust had used to generate fees for their marble lobbies and executive bonuses was now going to fund scholarship programs for kids whose parents worked 2 jobs just to keep the lights on. The same capital that had paid for Myra's designer suits was now backing sustainable startups run by people who shopped at thrift stores and drove cars older than some of their employees. But here's the part that would have made Myra's head explode if she'd known. I made sure that exactly $170, the same amount she'd laughed at, was automatically donated every month to 500 different scholarship accounts. Not because the recipients needed exactly that amount, but because I wanted to prove a point that would echo through the financial world for years to come. Every month, somewhere in America, a kid got $170 for books or school supplies or college application fees, funded by the money that came from the bank account of a man their benefactors would never meet. Every month, 500 families got a little help from the guy who'd been called a beggar for trying to invest that exact same amount. The paperwork for the Community Futures Fund was elegant in its simplicity. No complex derivatives, no offshore shell companies, no tax avoidance schemes that required teams of lawyers to explain. Just straightforward investments in housing cooperatives, educational programs, and small businesses that were trying to build something real in communities that traditional banks had written off as unprofitable. Maria Santos understood what Solon Trust never had. That respect isn't about the size of someone's portfolio. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who walks through your door. When I told her about my experience at Solon Trust, she just shook her head and said, "Their loss is our community's gain." That night, sitting on my deck with a beer and watching the sunset paint the lake in shades of gold and crimson, I realized something important. Pulling my money out of Solon Trust had felt like justice, but putting it into the Community Futures Fund felt like purpose. One was about settling scores. The other was about changing the game entirely. The beautiful thing about real wealth isn't what it can buy you. It's what it can build for other people. And while Mira was probably updating her LinkedIn profile and wondering how her career had imploded so spectacularly, the money she'd dismissed as worthless was quietly changing lives across the country, one $170 donation at a time. For months after Solon Trust learned the most expensive customer service lesson in banking history, I decided to throw a dinner party. Not the kind of flashy affair that billionaires usually host to show off their wealth, but something quieter, more meaningful, the kind of gathering my grandfather would have appreciated. The guest list was carefully curated, old friends from my construction days who still didn't know about K. Ramil, young entrepreneurs whose startups were being funded by the Community Futures Fund, and a handful of former Solon Trust employees who'd quit in disgust after learning how their bank had treated a client seeking to invest just $170. My lake house had never hosted anything fancier than a poker game, but that night it felt like exactly the right place to celebrate what really mattered. We grilled burgers on the same deck where I'd read about Myra's resignation, shared stories about second chances and small beginnings, and talked about the kind of investing that actually changed lives instead of just padding quarterly reports. That's when Helena Glenmont showed up. I was refilling drinks when I spotted her through the kitchen window, standing at the edge of my driveway like she wasn't sure she had the right address. Myra's younger sister had always been the decent one in that family, the teacher who chose helping kids over chasing profit margins. But seeing her here, uninvited and obviously nervous, told me everything I needed to know about why she'd made the drive out to the lake. "Reed," she said when I opened the front door. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to talk to you. About Mira." I gestured toward the garden path that led away from the house, away from my guests and their laughter. "She's been having a rough time, I imagine. She's broken, Reed. Completely broken. No job, no prospects. No one in the industry will touch her after what happened. She's been blacklisted." Helena's eyes were red-rimmed, like she'd been crying during the drive. "She didn't know who you were. She had no idea." I stopped walking and looked at her directly. "Exactly. What do you mean, exactly? That's the whole point, Helena. She didn't know, and she didn't care to find out. She saw someone who looked different from her usual clients and decided he was worthless. That's not ignorance. That's character." Helena pulled a crumpled pamphlet from her purse, smoothing it out with shaking hands. "What's this?" I smiled, recognizing the brochure for the Riverside Community Center, a program I'd quietly funded in Myra's old neighborhood. The same area where she'd grown up before climbing her way to the top of the corporate ladder, the same streets where she'd learned to look down on people who reminded her of where she came from. "Tell her the man she humiliated built this," I said, handing the pamphlet back to her. "And tell her it's not named after me. It's named after the people she called beggars." These days, I start every morning the same way, walking through the community garden that sits on land my first investment helped reclaim from an abandoned lot in East Brooklyn. It's not the kind of place that makes headlines or wins awards, just a quiet patch of green where tomatoes grow in neat rows and sunflowers reach toward the sky, like they're trying to touch something better than the concrete jungle surrounding them. The garden doesn't know I'm a billionaire. The kids playing on the swing set their parents built from donated lumber don't care that I used to be married to a woman who called people like their families beggars. The elderly folks tending their herb plots just see another guy in jeans who shows up early and doesn't mind getting dirt under his fingernails. There's a small plaque on the gate, nothing fancy, just weathered bronze with simple words, "Respect is grown quietly." Most people walk past it without reading, but that's fine. The best lessons are usually the ones nobody notices until they need them. This morning, like every morning, I stopped by Mrs. Rodriguez's corner where she grows the best peppers in 3 boroughs. She's 86, speaks mostly Spanish, and makes coffee strong enough to wake the dead. She doesn't know that the man who funded this garden is the same one who brought down Solon Trust with a whisper. The world still doesn't know I'm K. Ramil, and I like it that way. Power that needs to announce itself isn't really power at all, it's just noise. Real strength grows in silence, takes root in small acts of kindness, blooms when nobody's watching. Sometimes I think about Mira, wonder if she ever drives past this place and remembers the neighborhood where she learned to be ashamed of being poor. Wonder if she understands yet that the greatest revenge isn't destroying someone. It's becoming everything they never had the courage to be. But mostly, I just tend the garden and watch children play, knowing that the boy who couldn't afford to take his wife to fancy restaurants became the man who built playgrounds for kids whose parents worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. The storm nobody predicted turned out to be the quiet rain that makes everything grow. And somewhere in the city, in boardrooms and banks where they still whisper about the day a construction worker brought down Solon Trust, they're learning that the most dangerous people aren't the ones who scream the loudest. They're the ones who smile politely, say nothing, and let their actions plant seeds that bloom into consequences. I am the storm that whispers. And Mira? She lives forever with the memory of one moment, one laugh, one insult that cost her everything she thought mattered. While I tend gardens and change the world one seed at a time.